City Park stretches out like a perfect postcard on the other side of the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the museum. I never get tired of it, despite coming here almost every week. Being the only classy location within my personal city bubble where I can get a small coffee and a breakfast burrito for under $5, I happily walk the hour to get here, especially as it necessitates walking through that gorgeous park, skirting the edge of a man-made lake generally filled with geese, ducks, and various other water-loving fowl. On crisp mornings, the whooping of monkeys from the zoo next door echoes across the entire park. Took me forever to figure out what that sound was. I happened to see a commercial for some class by Jane Goodall in which she makes similar noises, and the light in my brain clicked on. It's still relatively quiet. The opening crowd of baby-wearing, stroller-pushing mamas and squealing toddlers are all still encased either in the Discovery Zone or Space Odyssey. I'll have at least an hour to sip my coffee before snack time. I while away the time staring at the little moving dots wandering across the park panorama and eavesdropping on the few guests and employees who wander by. Eventually, I slump back into my chair, unwilling to accept the fact my coffee is gone and I ought to be working. I promised my readers and one of my old story characters a new novella and don't seem to be gaining days through procrastination. Since going home to my desk on such a beautiful day feels somehow blasphemous, I look up for a sign. And there it is. An arrow pointed to the third floor and the neat typeset words, "Explore Colorado." Why not? My characters will be wandering the mountains. The displays might provide some setting details. So off I tramp after a brief existential crisis in front of the trash bins. The museum uses the same compostable containers and napkins as the Botanic Gardens. But is compostable the same as recyclable? The gardens have compost bins. The museum does not. Deep breath. I dart toward the bin with the most easily accessible hole in the top for my trash, then duck away at a sharp angle, hoping no one saw me and sending up a silent yet ardent "I'm sorry" to the environmental gods. I pad up the metal staircase, surprised by how little sound I make after the fierce clanging I sometimes witness during these reposes. To be fair, those patrons tend to be about 5 years old. At the landing, another sign informs me I must detour through Botswana before returning to my home state. Duly warned, I strike out on safari with caution, maneuvering through a life-against-death racetrack with all the grace one might expect from a first-world city girl, namely standing transfixed with eyes wide and mouth agape as my imminent trampling approaches. As luck would have it, I narrowly avoid my fate and soon find myself hovering over a topography map indicating the 8 climactic regions of Colorado, one of which is apparently in Arizona. Not really sure whose idea that was, but they likely donated a good amount of money to this haul. After studying the layout, I take myself over to the suggested starting point for diorama viewing, then point myself in the direction opposite that indicated on the map. Ha! That's right. Didn't take me for a rebel, did you? The journey begins on a positive note, one diorama left of Arizona, where I find vindication of my best Google guessed descriptions of southern Colorado near Pueblo. Residing in Southern California's Antelope Valley at the time when I wrote his Steel City Promise, I was forced to trudge through memories of the last time I had to deal with topographical maps during land navigation exercises on Fort Carson. An endless sea of brown, brittle shrubbery came to mind, along with dagger-like spines of yucca plants stabbing through my BDU pant legs to leave me marred and bruised for weeks. Those memories which remained out of focus I assumed resembled the high desert of my more recent acquaintance, and this diorama tells me I was correct. I move on to alpine and subalpine regions, my main interest being the resemblance to areas visited in my childhood. Being of Austrian stock on one side of the family tree, these depictions make me nostalgic for mountain trips with my grandparents. Moving on to the shrublands, my eyes fall on the scrub jay. There's a bird I ought to include in my book somehow. The interactive information button tells me this bird is actually brown, but some magic of light reflection makes its feathers appear blue at certain angles. Fascinating. Yes, I mean that. Over in the grasslands, I find a magpie gawking at me. Now these little buggers I know. The park is swarming with them. I haven't taken a stance for or against them, but the way they stare me down as I walk by, daring me to play chicken and lose, makes me hesitate to admire them too freely. Apparently I have a thing for birds. Makes me wonder whatever happened to those binoculars my mom gifted me as a kid, specifically for bird watching, which I had zero interest in at the time. Circling back to the starting point, I face the double doors leading out to the main atrium, pausing as the corner of my eye snags on a display I usually ignore. The wall boasts a series of portrait photos and a sketch I recognize as a rendering of this hall as it appeared in its early days. The sketch resembles what I recall and imagine from older museums in grand cities. It highlights cabinet displays set between large windows which no self-respecting modern museum would dare maintain. Stacks of halls frame an internal atrium, while wood and brass railings mark the limits of traversable space. My eyes wander down to a wood and brass railing attached to the wall, completely out of place. I squint up at the railing in the sketch, then back down. Oh, I get it now. Huh, that's nifty. How many years have I been walking by that? With a shrug, I dig my phone out of my purse and level it at the wall. My only prayer of remembering anything I learn at the museum is to take a picture of it. A few taps later, I lower my phone, stepping back and taking in with my eyes what the camera lens so flippantly captured. My head begins to dangle to the side as I look over each picture again, reading the disjointed captions which fail to form a cohesive narrative. But what's the rest? I wish I could shout, gnashing my teeth and glaring at each black and white figure in turn, as though one of them ought to answer the question. Fine then, be that way. I shut my eyes, reaching out to run my fingers along the polished railing against the wall, attempting to imagine what the hall would have looked like and wishing I had a more vivid imagination. It's no use. I let out my breath on a sigh and blink my eyes open. Casting one last glance over my shoulder with a silent promise to return soon, I step out of the hall and straight into 1918.